Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The sun was setting over the city of Boston, enveloping the skyscrapers in a golden glow. In the bustling streets of the city center, the cafe terraces filled with young executives, students, and families enjoying the mildness of a Saturday afternoon. Among them, a young woman walked confidently. Amelia Johnson, 23, wore an elegant ivory dress and carried a simple bag. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, and her determined gaze betrayed the ambition within her. A brilliant law student at Harvard, she dreamed of following in the footsteps of her father, General William Johnson, Supreme Commander of the National Police. But on this day, Amelia wasn't the daughter of a high-ranking officer, she was simply a young woman wanting to drink coffee and study for her lessons. As she was about to enter a chic neighborhood cafe, a patrol car stopped abruptly near the curb. Two police officers got out. One of them, Officer Robert Miller, a tough-looking man in his 40s, glanced suspiciously at Amelia. "Hey, you," he said in an authoritative voice. Amelia, surprised, turned around. "Yes, officer?" she asked politely. "What are you doing here?" "Show me your ID." "I bet you have no business being in this neighborhood." Passers-by began to slow down, intrigued. Amelia felt their gazes weighing on her. Her heart was beating fast, but she remained calm. "I'm just here for a coffee, like everyone else." "Is that a problem?" she replied in a calm voice. Agent Miller sneered. "A coffee? Here? Do you think we'll believe you? This isn't your kind of place. These shops aren't for girls like you." The contemptuous tone smacked like a slap. Amelia felt the sting of humiliation, but she forced herself to hold her head high. She took out her Harvard student ID, thinking to put an end to this misunderstanding. But Miller almost snatched it from her hands and burst out laughing in front of everyone. "Harvard? Really? Don't make me laugh. You stole it, admit it." An indignant murmur rippled through the crowd. Some passers-by filmed the scene with their phones. Amelia, her eyes shining but her voice firm, replied, "I have nothing to prove to a man who judges me solely by the color of my skin." Officer Miller, offended by her audacity, took a step toward her, ready to drag her into the station. But what he was completely unaware of was that the young woman he had just publicly belittled was none other than the daughter of General Johnson, his absolute superior, the man the entire police hierarchy respected and feared. And soon, that arrogant gesture would unleash a storm he could never have imagined. The cafe terrace was silent. All the customers held their breath, their eyes fixed on Amelia and Agent Miller. Murmurs rose quietly, some indignant, others shocked, but no one dared to intervene yet. Amelia, despite the lump of anxiety tightening her throat, held the policeman's gaze. She had learned from her father never to bow to injustice. "I haven't done anything illegal. You have no reason to arrest me," she said in a clear voice, although trembling inwardly. But Miller, puffed up by his uniform and his authority, did not want to lose face in front of the crowd. He took out his notebook, looking haughty. "Your insolent attitude confirms my suspicions. You don't belong here. We're going to run a background check on you, and if you lie, you'll regret it." He gestured to his colleague, a young police officer named Officer Blake, who seemed hesitant. Blake didn't have the same arrogance as Miller. He was watching Amelia with a mixture of embarrassment and doubt. "Robert, maybe we could," Blake began. "Shut up, Blake." Miller cut in abruptly. "You can see she's hiding something." Amelia clenched her fists. Her breathing quickened, but she remained motionless, refusing to show her fear. Around her, several passers-by were already filming the scene. An elderly woman spoke timidly. "Officer, she didn't do anything. She's a student, I see her here often." Miller glared at the old lady. "Mind your own business," he barked, causing the witness to back away. The humiliation was becoming unbearable. Amelia felt her dignity trampled, but in her mind only one thought echoed: "If only he knew who I am." As he prepared to grab her arm and drag her away, Amelia took a deep breath. She calmly took out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Who do you think you're calling?" Miller sneered. Amelia held his gaze with icy serenity. "To someone who will be very interested in knowing how you treat citizens, and especially me." A few seconds later, a deep voice rang through the receiver. "Amelia? Is everything okay?" She felt her heart relax as she heard the voice of her father, General William Johnson. All eyes turned to her. Miller, still not understanding what trap he had just fallen into, stared at her with a contemptuous smile. Amelia, without looking away from the agent, simply replied, "Dad. I think it's time you saw what's going on here." And in that moment, Agent Miller's fate had changed. The silence on the terrace was soon broken by the sound of a powerful engine screeching to a halt around the corner. A black car with tinted windows, escorted by two other vehicles, parked in front of the cafe. Passers-by turned around, intrigued, as several men in dark suits quickly got out, securing the area. Miller frowned, but didn't move. He still didn't understand. Amelia kept the phone pressed to her ear, her eyes fixed on the figure getting out of the main car. A tall, graying-haired man with a military bearing stepped forward with firm steps. His impeccable uniform gleamed in the evening light. His mere presence commanded respect. It was General William Johnson, Supreme Commander of the National Police. The whispers intensified. Several passers-by took out their phones to film the scene. Even young Officer Blake's eyes widened, suddenly realizing who the young woman who had been humiliated just minutes earlier was. Miller, however, remained frozen, but a feeling of unease began to knot his stomach. Amelia calmly hung up and, without trembling, turned to face her approaching father. "Dad," she said in a calm voice, but filled with contained emotion. General Johnson placed his protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. His gaze, however, immediately fixed on Agent Miller. Cold, piercing, authoritative. "Explain to me, Agent Miller," his voice echoed in the tense silence, "what is the reason for this humiliating control over my daughter?" A shudder ran through the crowd. Agent Miller paled. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He had never imagined that the young woman he so contemptuously accused was actually the daughter of his absolute superior. "General, I didn't know. I just thought that," Miller stammered. The general cut him off with a wave of his hand. "What did you think, officer? That a young black woman had no right to be in this neighborhood? That she had to prove her legitimacy just to walk into a coffee shop?" The general's voice, firm but vibrant with suppressed anger, echoed throughout the street. Passers-by, captivated, held their breath. Miller tried to justify himself, but his words came out choked. The general took a step forward, completely dominating the scene. "You have just publicly humiliated an innocent citizen. You have insulted her dignity. And worse," he paused, his hard gaze locked with Miller's, "you have proven before witnesses what I fight against every day, racism and the abuse of power in our ranks." Amelia, standing next to her father, felt her eyes mist over. Not with shame, but with pride. For the first time since the incident began, she was no longer alone. General Johnson turned slightly to his daughter, then looked at the crowd. "This man will have to answer for his actions. And I assure you, in front of each of you here, that he will pay the price." Thunderous applause erupted among the witnesses. Bystanders' cameras captured every second. Miller, however, was nothing more than a quivering shadow, realizing that his career had collapsed in an instant. The incident at the cafe wasn't confined to the witnesses. Within an hour, videos filmed by bystanders were circulating on social media. The footage clearly showed Agent Miller belittling Amelia, laughing at her status as a student, and then the heartbreaking scene where General Johnson arrived to defend his daughter. The title of the first publications was unequivocal. "A police officer humiliates the daughter of the National Police Chief because she is black." Views exploded. Within hours, the video went viral. News channels interrupted their programs to comment on the footage. Journalists debated, experts denounced the abuse of power, and citizens were outraged. At police headquarters, the scandal exploded like a bombshell. Robert Miller's name was on everyone's lips. Some superiors, shocked, demanded immediate sanctions. Others, embarrassed, feared for the institution's already fragile image. Amelia, for her part, found herself in the midst of a storm she hadn't sought. In her room that evening, she reread the thousands of messages of support she'd received. Young black women, students, mothers. All wrote to her to say they'd experienced similar humiliations. She put down her phone and closed her eyes. The pain of the scene was still raw, the stares of passers-by, Miller's laughter, the sting of humiliation. But at the same time, something was growing inside her. A new strength. In the living room, General Johnson was already preparing his strategy. On the phone with his advisors, he ordered Miller's immediate suspension and the convening of an internal investigation. But deep down, he knew that this matter was more than just disciplinary. It had become a symbol. The next morning, Amelia agreed, despite her hesitation, to testify publicly. Dressed soberly in front of the cameras, she spoke in a calm but firm voice. "I am not just General Johnson's daughter. I am a citizen like any other. And yesterday, I was humiliated because I am black. What happened to me happens to thousands of people every day without anyone filming, without anyone defending them. If my voice can be used to denounce these abuses, then I will raise it." His speech had the effect of a detonation. The media repeated his words over and over again. Demonstrations of support multiplied in front of police headquarters. Civil rights organizations demanded reforms. And meanwhile, Robert Miller, cloistered at home, saw his career and reputation crumble under the weight of the truth. But for Amelia, this was only the beginning. Her humiliation, far from extinguishing her, had transformed her into a voice for a cause greater than herself. The scandal had now reached the highest levels of the state. In the governor's office, phones rang off the hook. Senators, mayors, and even federal representatives demanded explanations. The video of the incident had not only tarnished the image of the police, but it also highlighted a systemic problem that had gone unaddressed for too long. General William Johnson, although widely acclaimed for his intervention, found himself in a delicate position. On the one hand, he was an angry father determined to obtain justice for his daughter. On the other, he was the supreme commander of the National Police, charged with protecting the image and stability of the institution he led. At an emergency meeting, his deputies outlined the issues. "General, if we do not react quickly, this scandal could undermine the already fragile public confidence," said one. "We need to calm the crowds and show that we're taking this seriously. But be careful, Miller has his supporters. Some police unions are already defending him," added another. William Johnson clenched his fists. He knew these power games. But this time, there was no way he was backing down. That same evening, he spoke to the press. In front of dozens of microphones and cameras pointed at him, he declared in a firm voice, "I speak today not only as the General of the National Police, but also as a father. What happened to my daughter Amelia was not an isolated incident. It reflects a deeper evil, the racism and abuse of power that still plague parts of our law enforcement. Officer Miller will be suspended immediately and brought before a disciplinary committee. And I promise you that concrete reforms will be implemented so that no citizen will ever again experience such humiliation." A heavy silence followed his words, before the journalists burst into questions. But this speech had already made an impression. For the first time, the head of the National Police Force had publicly acknowledged the problem of racism within his ranks. Meanwhile, Amelia watched her father on television. Her heart was torn. She was proud of him, of his courage and his righteousness. But she also knew that he had just made powerful enemies, within the institution itself. That night, as Boston lit up with fluorescent lights, the general sat alone in his office. He stared at the photo of his daughter on his desk, Amelia smiling at her high school graduation. A thought crossed his mind. This fight is only just beginning. And it's going to cost us dearly. The day after General Johnson's speech, Amelia found herself thrust into the headlines. Newspapers described her as a courageous young woman, a victim who had become a symbol of resilience and dignity. Social media buzzed with hashtags in her name. On the streets of Boston, signs displayed her face with the words, "Justice for Amelia, justice for all." But sudden fame had a downside. In his inbox, among the messages of support, also appeared anonymous letters, sometimes violent, sometimes veiled with threats. "You are destroying the reputation of the police. Shut up, or you'll regret it. We won't let a girl like you get the uniform dirty." Amelia felt a chilling fear run down her spine as she read those words. Yet she refused to give in. She responded to the messages of support, encouraging everyone to continue speaking out against injustice. For his part, General Johnson saw the situation worsening. At an internal meeting, several veteran officers expressed their disagreement. "With all due respect, General, you are exposing our men to popular vengeance. You kneel before the media. You forget that we must protect our image above all." Some, more virulent, even spoke of betrayal. The general, standing in the center of the room, his eyes dark, answered them bluntly. "Our image is worthless if it is based on lies and injustice. If you consider defending human dignity a weakness, then you are the ones betraying our uniform." A heavy silence followed. He knew he had just made powerful enemies within his own ranks. Meanwhile, the suspended officer Miller tried to salvage his honor. He gave an interview to a local network, claiming to have been framed by Amelia's arrogance. But his comments, far from garnering support, provoked an even greater wave of outrage. His contempt and abusive behavior were clearly visible in the videos. The divide was widening. On one side, a population galvanized by Amelia's example and the general's courage. On the other, a section of the police, tense, refusing to acknowledge its wrongdoing. One night, as Amelia was walking home from college, a dark car followed her for several blocks. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding, until a call from her father forced her to stop. The car disappeared immediately. Was it a coincidence, or a warning? That night, Amelia realized her voice had become a weapon. But like any weapon, it also attracted danger. Amelia's face was now known throughout the country. News channels invited her for debates, student associations organized conferences around her testimony. But it was when she agreed to speak at a rally in front of the Boston chapters that everything changed. That evening, thousands of people were present. They held placards that read, "Never again. Justice and equality. Dignity has no color." Amelia stepped onto the makeshift stage. The spotlights blinded her, the crowd buzzing with anticipation. Her heart was pounding, but she took a deep breath and let her voice rise. "A week ago, I was humiliated in front of witnesses, not because I had committed a crime, but because my skin is black. But I am not alone. What happened to me has happened, and still happens, to thousands of others every day. I am here to say, enough. We will not be silenced anymore." The crowd erupted in cheers. Shouts of support rose from all sides. Amelia felt a new strength fill her. She was no longer a victim, she had become a collective voice. Meanwhile, in a hushed office at police headquarters, General Johnson watched the speech live. Around him, his closest advisors were divided. "General, with all due respect, your daughter is rekindling a fire that will consume us. She's right. It's time for reform, we have a unique opportunity to act." But not everyone was in favor. Some high-ranking officers were already whispering, organizing internal resistance. They saw Johnson as betraying the institution by exposing its flaws. Whispers of a silent mutiny circulated. The general sat watching the images of Amelia galvanizing the crowd. His face was grave. A dilemma gnawed at him: publicly supporting his daughter risked fracturing the institution he led. But to remain silent would be to betray his own conscience. The following night, he received a confidential file. Trusted agents warned him, a group of officers, led by an influential commissioner, was preparing a movement to have him removed from his post. The Amelia affair had become the spark for an underground war. Meanwhile, Amelia, exhausted but buoyed by popular fervor, received an unexpected invitation to speak before Congress in Washington. She then understood that her fight extended beyond the borders of Boston. But in the shadows, those who wanted to silence her were already sharpening their weapons. The building of the chapter shone in the Washington sun. Amelia, dressed in a simple, dark suit, walked firmly down the long corridor leading to the courtroom. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes reflected a new determination. Beside her, her father, General Johnson, walked silently, his face closed. As Amelia entered the great hall, she was greeted by a flurry of flashes and whispers. Members of Congress, senators, and representatives were waiting for her. Cameras beamed live to millions of homes. She was no longer just the humiliated daughter of a general. She had become a national symbol. Sitting in front of the committee, Amelia took a deep breath, then spoke in a clear voice. "I am here not to speak only about myself, but to speak about all those who are never heard. What happened to me was not an accident. It is the product of a system where certain officials abuse their authority, where the color of one's skin still determines how one is treated. Today, I ask that this nation finally face this problem." A solemn silence reigned. The senators took notes, some nodded, others kept their faces impassive. She continued, her voice gaining in intensity. "If I, the daughter of the head of the National Police, could be humiliated like this, imagine what those who have neither cameras to protect them nor voices to defend them go through every day." The room erupted in applause. Even some of the usually reserved elected officials rose to salute his courage. Meanwhile, in a remote room, several senior police officers were watching the broadcast. Among them, Commissioner Douglas Kane, an influential man, was frowning. His allies around him were talking in low voices. "This girl is becoming dangerous. And his father even more so. If he continues to expose our weaknesses, he will destroy the balance of the institution." Kane nodded, his gaze hard. "It's time to act. Johnson must fall. And his daughter must be silenced before she becomes untouchable." These words, spoken in the shadows, sounded like a condemnation. Back in the congressional hall, Amelia finished her testimony to thunderous applause. She smiled shyly, but her father, seated in the back, kept his expression closed. Because he understood. This moment of glory elevated Amelia even higher, but also put her in a line of fire he feared more than anything. The next morning, the entire city seemed to be holding its breath. The press conference called by General Marcus Williams was scheduled to take place on the steps of police headquarters. Reporters flocked from everywhere, cameras and microphones at the ready, eager to hear what the state's top law enforcement officer had to say. Inside the building, Marcus stood upright in front of a mirror. He adjusted his uniform jacket, each metal shining like a reminder of his impeccable career. Beside him, Aisha, his daughter, wore a simple but elegant dress. Her eyes expressed both raw pain and newfound strength. She knew this moment was not just for her, but for all black women and men who suffered daily humiliation. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked in a deep but tender voice. "More than ever, Dad," Aisha replied, her gaze firm. As the doors opened, a sea of flashes greeted them. Silence fell as soon as they took their places in front of the microphones. Marcus took a deep breath, then addressed the crowd. "Last night, my daughter Aisha, a citizen of this city, was humiliated by a police officer who judged her worth solely by the color of her skin. This officer didn't know she was my daughter, and that's precisely what makes this act even more revealing. This isn't an isolated mistake, it's a reflection of a systemic problem." A murmur ran through the crowd. The journalist scribbled, recording every word. Marcus placed a protective hand on Aisha's shoulder, then continued. "I tell you today as chief of police, I will not tolerate my own ranks becoming an instrument of injustice. The officer concerned will be suspended immediately, and an investigation will be opened. But beyond this case, I am launching a far-reaching reform. Humiliations based on racism must no longer have a place, neither on our streets nor in our institutions. At that moment, Aisha took a step toward the microphone. Her heart was pounding, but her voice rang out clear and determined. Yesterday, I felt the shame that they try to impose on people like me, but I don't accept it. I'm not just a victim, I'm a woman, a citizen, and I want to be respected for who I am. I hope my story will help raise awareness. Thunderous applause erupted, surprising even some of the police officers present. Several journalists stood up, visibly moved. In the crowd, community members were already holding up makeshift signs, "Justice for Aisha," "End Racism in the Police." The movement was launched. And as the cameras filmed this historic moment, the agent responsible for the humiliation, who stood aside, turned pale as he realized that his action had not only affected a young woman, but had triggered an irreversible wave of change. Robert Miller had never experienced such humiliation. Every media outlet, every social media outlet, every newspaper was now discussing his behavior. Videos of the incident and Aisha's speech were being shared at lightning speed, and every comment highlighted his brutality and arrogance. At home, alone in his apartment, Miller stared at his computer screen, unable to look away. Calls from his superiors came thick and fast, each one more urgent than the last. "Miller, your suspension is effective immediately. Prepare to answer to the disciplinary committee. We have received hundreds of complaints against you. Your behavior will not be tolerated." He felt a mixture of fear and anger rising within him. He had always believed his authority was unquestionable, that no one could stand in his way. And now everything was falling apart. At the same time, Commissioner Douglas Kane, Miller's longtime ally, saw an opportunity in the case. Kane had long harbored personal ambitions. He saw Miller's fall as a way to manipulate the situation to weaken General Johnson. "Robert, you must remain calm. But know this, some among us don't want this humiliation to end so easily. We could turn the situation to our advantage. I don't want any shenanigans, Kane. I just want to be forgotten." Miller replied, his face pale. But fate had decided otherwise. The disciplinary committee moved swiftly. The witness testimonies and video evidence were overwhelming. Miller could no longer deny the truth. On the day of the hearing, as the press waited outside, Miller faced the board. The tension was palpable. Every word spoken, every gesture was recorded, commented on, analyzed. The stares of his colleagues, some sympathetic but many stern, overwhelmed him. The verdict came as no surprise: permanent suspension and recommendation for dismissal. His career was over. For the first time, he understood the magnitude of his mistake. It was not only a humiliation for Amelia, but a signal to the entire community. Times were changing, and he had remained stuck in an outdated system. For her part, Amelia, informed of the verdict, felt a mixture of relief and pride. But she knew the battle was only just beginning. The systemic injustice was still present, and new challenges awaited her. And as Miller took off his uniform for the last time, the crowd and the media celebrated a small victory. One voice, Aisha's, had just changed the course of an entire institution. A few months had passed since the cafe incident. Amelia, now recognized as Aisha Johnson in the public sphere, continued to speak out at conferences, demonstrations, and debates on police reform. His face had become a symbol of courage and dignity, inspiring thousands of young people to stand up against injustice. General William Johnson, despite internal resistance and threats, had managed to implement concrete reforms. Awareness programs on racism and abuse of power were introduced, disciplinary procedures were strengthened, and an independent system of oversight for officers was created. Trust, long shaken, was beginning to be rebuilt. As for Robert Miller, his career over, he found himself isolated, confronted with the reality of his actions and public opprobrium. Justice had taken its course, and his name was now associated with the humiliation he had inflicted. Aisha, standing on the steps of the new police training center, delivered a speech to a gathered crowd. "What we have accomplished is not just for me. It is for all those who have never had the chance to be heard. Today, We lay a stone for a future where every citizen is treated with respect, regardless of the color of their skin or their status. We have shown that injustice can be confronted, and that courage always triumphs in the end. The crowd erupted in cheers, flags flapped in the wind, and cameras captured every moment. Father and daughter looked at each other. Their eyes shone with mutual pride, knowing that this fight had been more than just a personal matter. It had sparked profound change in their community and in the institution they loved. At that precise moment, Aisha understood that the pain and humiliation she had suffered had been transformed into an irresistible force. Her name, her story, and her dignity would now be an example to all those who fought against injustice. And as the sun set over Boston, a new era seemed to be dawning. An era where respect, justice, and dignity were no longer privileges, but universal rights.